Brooke Sargent is coming to us from Honeycomb, and she is going to talk to us about fostering a culture of learning through observability.
Hello.
So please welcome Brooke.
Hello. I've been a really big fan of this conference for the past couple of years, so I'm really excited to be here as a speaker on a real island this year. It's super cool. So I'm Brooke Sargent. Thank you all for being here. And today we're going to talk about how observability can not only help your team solve technical problems, but it can improve your team's culture as well. Before we jump into it, here's a little bit of background about me. I am a software engineer at Honeycomb, working on APIs and integrations with various tools in the developer ecosystem. My background prior to this was working on headless direct-to-consumer e-commerce websites and connected devices, and during that time, I worked in both software engineering and engineering manager roles. I got really interested in observability when working on connected devices specifically because it was a distributed system with a fair amount of complexity, and adopting observability made my life and my team's life easier. And a fun fact about me is I love decorating for Halloween, both in Animal Crossing, as you can see in my photo, and real life. I've already started decorating for Halloween at home. All right, so before I became a Honeycomb employee, I was a Honeycomb user at a previous job. Everyone on that team, and really the company overall, were pretty new to observability. Today, I want to share a slightly fictionalized story about that journey of observability adoption and how implementing an observability practice impacted the culture of the team. So again, this story is 100% based on real events, but I've just changed some of the names for some familiar characters. So jumping into our story, everyone's favorite capitalist, Tom Nook, decides he wants a platform that can manage inventory at Nook's Cranny. He thinks this is an investment that will save him time and money, so he puts together a small team to build it. One of the things the team did when they formed was put in place standards and best practices they wanted to follow while building this platform. They settled on the following standards. Code gets to prod in less than 15 minutes, 70% or greater test coverage-ish, end-to-end canary tests run on core code paths a few times per hour and alert on issues or errors, and team members merge small, frequent changes to keep diffs manageable. The team was feeling pretty good about themselves after agreeing on this list. Most of them had worked on legacy systems before, where these things were either an afterthought or not included at all. They wanted to build a better system. Despite setting those standards and holding each other accountable to them, the more engineers that onboarded to the team and the more features and complexity they added to the platform, things got more painful to operate and understand. When problems came up, they had logs to investigate, but for the senior engineers, it took time to kind of sift through the logs. For the junior and mid-level engineers, they could see the log messages, read them, Google them, but they didn't have enough context about how it connected to the rest of the system. So when discussing the pain that they were feeling as a team, there were two main sticking points they felt they needed to resolve to hold true to that promise of building a better system and a better way of doing things than they had experienced on other teams. Those were confidence in deploys and time to resolution. So a few members of the team had been hearing about observability, and the benefits they'd heard about sounded like it might be able to help resolve their pain, but they still didn't really know what it meant to have observability or how to get started. So they did some research, and this is what having observability meant for them. They added tracing to their code, starting with the most important service first, and then carved out dev cycles in each sprint to add traces to at least one more service until each service was instrumented. Each function call in a service got wrapped into a span that had attributes the engineers thought their future selves might care about when debugging. They invested in a tool to help with visualization and discoverability of the telemetry data. In this case, they chose Honeycomb. And this tool displayed their traces with multiple spans as a waterfall so they could see how the code was executed, how long each function call took, and the actual data associated with the function calls in production. And most importantly, they added an ongoing practice of observability to their code review process and held each other accountable to answer the question, how can we observe this in prod before shipping new features? So this is an example of what that waterfall view looked like once they had implemented tracing, and each of those spans on the waterfall can be clicked on to get more information about the parameters and attributes set when this code was running. So if they wanted to know the count value in each of those get current count executions, or who on the wait list was notified that the spooky arch is back in stock, it's right there at their fingertips. So over the next month or two, confidence in deploys increase, and each member of the team, regardless of their experience level, can jump into debugging, finding answers much more quickly than before. The pain they were feeling is lifting. But most importantly, now that the team has an observability practice in place, there is a noticeable shift in culture. It changes from a knowing culture to a learning culture. In a knowing culture, people are doing the same thing over and over again and know exactly how it's going to go as a result. Confidence is gained from repetition. In a learning culture, it's more common to do things you haven't done before, but with the confidence that you can observe and measure how it's behaving and adjust as needed. Work in learning cultures is approached much more like a bunch of little experiments. So like observability, there are a lot of definitions of culture of learning floating around, but this one is my favorite. A mindset within an organization where learning and improvement are at the heart of how people prioritize their time, do their jobs, and interact with one another. In chapter 10 of the book Accelerate, which I'm sure many of you have read, but if you haven't, definitely check it out. It is stated in the section on organizational culture and identity that the best thing you can do for your products, your company, and your people is institute a culture of experimentation and learning. So now I want to share some qualities that are core to a culture of learning and how practicing observability contributes to building these qualities on engineering teams, as well as other things teams can do outside of observability that exhibit these same qualities that will strengthen your team. So first up, make learning habitual. Like I mentioned earlier in the talk, a really important part of implementing an observability practice is baking it into the processes that work for the team. Tom Nook's team made sure that asking how to observe a feature was part of their code review process, as well as actually going and observing it post-merge. It became a habit within the lifecycle of a feature, and it allowed the engineers to make any necessary adjustments before calling a feature done and shifting their focus to something else. This is one example of learning being habitual, but it can be habitual in other ways too, such as normalizing sharing what you've learned from mistakes or faulty deployments with the rest of your team as those mistakes happen, so that everybody can learn from them each time. Next, reward curiosity. Good observability tooling does this by ensuring information is at your fingertips, and every time you ask a question of your system, you're quickly rewarded with information and being at least one step closer to an answer or a solution. Other ways this can be modeled on engineering teams outside of observability is engineers of all levels being comfortable admitting when they don't know things and asking questions to fill in those knowledge gaps. This behavior can go a long way in shaping junior engineers to see people who have been promoted and climb the ladder to senior staff and principal levels admit they don't know something and still have that curiosity to ask questions and learn rather than pretend they have all the answers. Next, value progress over perfection. Rewarding and valuing progress is a way to encourage learning. Without being trapped by the rigidness of perfection, A team can be much more exploratory and take risks that can lead to really big wins. The practice of observability demonstrates progress because you don't need to know every attribute you want to track up front. It's a journey. You start with attributes you think your future self will want to know about, but if in the middle of solving a problem, you wish you had access to a couple of other attributes, you can just add them. As you and your team practice observability, you'll get better at it, and your system will become more and more observable. This quality can also be shown through size of deploys. Earlier, when talking about the standards Tom Nook's team agreed to, one of them was small, frequent deploys. Being able to sense when a feature adds value and merge it rather than waiting until it is perfectly baked and matches your vision exactly is a superpower. And finally, learning should be social. Learning should be something your team can do together. This manifests through observability and having links to interesting graphs and queries to share, so problem solving and debugging can truly become a team sport. With this capability, even remote teams can look over each other's metaphorical shoulders and build on what their teammates have discovered to reach a solution quickly. Outside of observability, having lunch and learns and hack weeks can be great ways to socialize learning on your engineering team. So these commonalities between learning culture and observability culture means that practicing observability improves your team's learning culture. And because of that, every member of an engineering team benefits from observability. To showcase that, I want to highlight a few different members of Tom Nook's team and talk about how they specifically have benefited from this observability journey the team has gone on. So first we have Raymond. He is a senior engineer who Tom Nook has recruited to join the team. He has quite a bit of experience coding and working on systems, but he hasn't worked on a team with a strong observability practice before. What he noticed through his onboarding process is that he's able to get up to speed faster than usual. Having a tool where he can see traces, how services interact, and the schema of the system helps him assemble a mental model so he can begin contributing. Having fresh eyes on the system telemetry data also means he can point out things that don't make sense to him and look a little weird, but the rest of the team already sees as normal, and he's able to solve bugs with only a couple weeks on the team under his belt. Next, we have Renee. She is a mid-level engineer who is eager to learn and level up in her software engineering career. She was on the team prior to the push for observability, and once distributed tracing was added, and she learned how to explore the data in Honeycomb, she felt far more empowered to jump into investigating bugs and outages. She used to only feel helpful troubleshooting problems she recognized and had experienced before, but now with observability tooling in place, she also feels helpful figuring out brand new errors as well. As a result of jumping into solving so many new problems, she is able to level up in her career faster than she would have on a team with no observability practice, because she wouldn't have had the confidence or the right tooling to solve those problems. And finally, we have Henry. He's been brought onto the team as an apprentice after teaching himself to code for a few months. He will be on the team for 6 months to learn how to be a software engineer and launch his career in tech. He has a lot to learn, and while how to instrument code and the jargon around observability feels a bit confusing and overwhelming to him, he's still able to reap the benefits of the instrumentation the team has put in place. He was chosen as an apprentice because of the curiosity he exhibited, and Honeycomb is the perfect place for him to ask endless questions to learn and satisfy that curiosity. He feels like it's the Stack Overflow of the actual system he is working on, and loves having a visual way to understand how data flows through the system. Not to mention, he has a place to independently ask questions and be curious, in addition to having senior engineers around to ask questions of and help him make sense of the telemetry data he's looking at. He doesn't think he would have been able to ramp up on the system as thoroughly or effectively if he was left to shuffle through logs to figure out how things worked. So this brings me to the end of our story about Tom Nook's engineering team and their observability adoption. They were able to learn and grow and successfully deliver Tom Nook's inventory management system, which can handle tracking all of the various items that Nook's Cranny sells in numerous color and style variations. And they can do this in large part because they had an observability practice to help them both with solving technical problems and fostering a strong, curious team. So a few takeaways are that buying a tool is not observability. Observability becomes a superpower when it is successfully embedded as a practice into existing team processes. Observability benefits every engineer on the team, not just the most senior engineers. And the following qualities are shared by a culture of observability and a culture of learning. Learning is habitual, curiosity is rewarded, progress is valued over perfection, and learning is social. Thank you all for listening to my talk.
Thank you. That was a great talk. And I'm also just loving your outfit. Like the yellow overalls is something that is very iconic.
Thank you.
It's great. And it's also always great to learn more about observability. I love talking about that culture of learning. Like, there's always so much we can be doing to be like, this is what I learned, tag, go do it better than I did. And like, we really need to continue fostering that. We are going to be taking questions on the speaker Q&A channel, so feel free to drop some of those in if you have something. I guess for me, one of the questions that I had as you were mentioning, like you were a user of Honeycomb and then got a chance to be like, oh, that tool looks cool, I want to work there. Like, what was your experience when you first had that learning moment through observability?
Yeah, so Renee is the character that I kind of based on myself. So I was a mid-level engineer working with people who had, 10, 15, 20 years of experience. And when I would ask them like how they were solving problems that were coming up in production, they were just like, oh, from experience. Like, I've seen this error message before. You'll get there, just like give it time. And I was kind of impatient. Like, I don't want to wait 10 years to be able to like do my job better. And I had been hearing about observability, so I tried it out, and it was just really cool to have a way to put the error messages and problems, or even if there's not like an actual error coming up, but just something that seems inconsistent, being able to see that in context of all of the code that's executing and like what the actual data associated with it is really powerful.
Definitely. I still remember it's like first going on like just pressing command find and like going through UIs and looking for stuff, and then like finally get to SSH and it's like, oh, let me grab stuff, and it's like, was this even the same time zone? Like, what am I looking at? Like,
Don't talk to me about time zones.
ooh, time. That's right. Sensitive. Time sensitive.
All right. Brooke, do you have any other like final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
Just if you haven't given observability a shot, like tracing, try it out and see if it helps you or your team. If you don't think that you specifically are going to benefit from it, maybe others on your team will. And then you can have that nice, strong culture of learning on your team.